Oh my God. So I am really excited to talk about this one. I'm psyched. First off, this is The Dollhouse Murders by Betty Ren Wright. And its tagline is, "What secret does the dollhouse hold?" Ooh. But first off, before anything else, this is a video about a children's book, but it is aimed at adult or sort of older readers, and it does contain spoilers and a few, maybe not adult themes, but kind of. Oh my gosh, my cat is here, Grim. I don't need your assistance, sir. Ow. I just told him I don't need his assistance, and he he gave me a little nip on the ankle. Why don't you just pull up a seat, Grimmy? Make yourself comfortable. Yes, that sounds good. Oh, you're a good boy. You're a good boy. Okay. It seems appropriate having Grim here, a little black cat, when we're talking about this book. So, are you ready to talk about some murder? What podcast is that from? I think I'm thinking of My Favorite Murder. But yeah, so it seems a little strange maybe that a book aimed at kids from 8 to 12 years old would be about murder, but basically it was the 80s. Yeah, I mean, I guess the contents of this book is probably about as scary or graphic maybe as an episode of Murder, She Wrote. So I guess it's not unlike things that kids would maybe be seeing on TV in a murder mystery show if they're watching it with their parents, but I don't know. But as I mentioned in another video on V.C. Andrews, kids as young as 10 were reading V.C. Andrews books back in the day and stuff like Stephen King. So I guess it's, it was just a thing. I don't know. But yeah, this book is The Dollhouse Murders, and I really love this book. So it came out in 1983, and even though it's not part of a series in the way that like Sweet Valley or Goosebumps, those kinds of books are, it is an Apple paperback, and these generally had a uniform look to the covers. So as you can see with this one, we have the 80s pink font with the hand-painted illustration. This one's very dramatic, and that's in the center with that colored border. There's like a little sort of V shape at the top, upside down V, and an apple. So that's the Apple paperbacks look for the time. And so in that way, these Apple paperbacks were similar size. They all had this kind of cover. So you could kind of collect these books in the same way that other kids would have been collecting, like I said, Sweet Valley, Goosebumps, those kinds of books. So, so these books fit into the kind of stuff you'd get at your Scholastic Book Fair. And yeah, I mean, they fit into that collectible marketing, definitely book fair, if you know what I mean. So on this one, we have our epic spooky dollhouse with what looks like living dolls. And we have our comically surprised and well illuminated protagonist here. She's either very shocked by what is occurring or she's doing jazz hands, one or the other. And as you can see in the picture, there's some great little dusty antiques around her in this attic space that she's in. She's got her button-up shirt there with the buttons done all the way up to the top. That's the kind of person she is. She is buttoned up. And that haircut's kind of interesting. I would say that haircut is a bit 80s that she has, but it's not in that big hair kind of way. So yeah, I couldn't tell for sure, but I think this is the first edition cover. This book itself is very popular. It's still in print today, and it's been through many editions, so I couldn't 100% tell for sure, but I think this is the first printing. And there's apparently a 1992 TV movie made out of this book, which is pretty cool. I haven't seen it. Normally I would watch something like that, but I just didn't have time in this case to kind of go into it. But Betty Ren Wright the author, was from Wisconsin, and she wrote over 35 books, quite a few of which were ghost stories for children, and they were popular. They may have sort of paved the way for later children's horror series that came up, because these were some of the early ones. They often had ghosts and that kind of thing. Well, I guess I said they were ghost stories, but I was thinking as opposed to other horror series, they often had this kind of haunted house vibe, which that's something that I love. So in this book, a girl called Amy finds a doll's house in the attic at her aunt's place while she's staying there. And the doll's house is like some doll's houses used to be. It was an antique toy-sized replica of the house itself. So sometimes you have a doll's house and it's a doll's house and it's got however you want in there. But sometimes people would have a replica of their house as their doll's house. And I think that's pretty cool. So when she starts to play with the doll's house, she finds the dolls start to reenact a murder that happened in the house a couple of generations before. So that's the vibe of this book. And I love this book. I'm only sad that I did not find this when I was a kid. I would have probably had nightmares, actually, but I would have loved it and been terrified. I was always obsessed with miniatures and doll's house, and I still am to some extent. It's something that I'm just always interested in. If you want to check out a really great but also very scary doll's house, the Instagram account at Southern Gothic Dollhouse is awesome. So if you know any other accounts, like miniature accounts and stuff like that, let me know, because then I can follow them too. But let's just dive in. So here we are at the start of the book, and from this point on, there's going to be plenty of spoilers. So I'm going to tell you the whole story. So we open at the mall with a quintessential pre-millennium kid hangout space. And Amy is shopping with the new kid in her class who's called Ellen. And Amy wants to impress Ellen because she really wants to be friends, but her younger sister, Luann, is there too. So Amy is 12, Luann is 11, but Luann has special needs, and she's wandering off and getting into things, sort of touching things that she shouldn't be or whatever. So Amy is embarrassed by her sister and a bit upset that Ellen, her new friend, seems to be embarrassed too. So the day is not going well. And then Luann accidentally damages a tulip in the florist's display, and the owner starts yelling at her. And then Amy tries to use her Christmas money to pay for the damage, and it creates this big scene. And afterwards, Ellen is like, I just want to go home. But then... You were fantastic in there, Amy. I loved it when you pulled out the money. I was scared to death of that man. What a beast. Amy took a deep breath. Maybe Ellen wasn't completely disgusted after all. I was scared too, she confessed. But he made me so mad. Luann makes me mad too, but I still don't like it when people insult her. She can't help the way she is. So maybe they can still be friends after all. Ellen seems to get it, but then she cancels their plans for a picnic the next day, and we learn that because of Luann, other girls at school don't really want to be her friend, and they don't want to hang out when Luann is there. So Amy's kind of got this feeling about it, and a lot of the time Amy has to take Luann with her. And so when her mother picks them up from the mall, rather than hearing the whole story and hearing how it didn't go well, her mother just immediately lays into Amy for not protecting her little sister who needs her. And Amy is mad. She says her piece. She tells her mom what she thinks, and then she storms off. So I think this is a really great first chapter. We understand very clearly that Amy loves her sister. She's a good sister, and they like each other and everything. But nobody wants their little sister around all the time. And the amount of time she has to spend with her sister is impacting her life. And Amy's parents are too distracted to see what she is doing right and how it's sort of becoming a problem for her. And they're caught up in what they need to get done, and they don't have time for her. And to me, this felt very realistic. From their point of view, they need her help with caring for Luann. But from the child reader's point of view, Amy is very relatable. And I think this was a great way to introduce this idea to kids at a time when there's not a lot of visibility or understanding around differently abled people. And I think now you could handle this a lot better. Maybe not handle it a lot better, but you could be more direct about this in a book, or have more detail about it or different things. But I just think for this time period when this kind of stuff wasn't spoken about directly sometimes, or there was stigma around it or that kind of thing, this book really opens up some discussion around quite a lot of things, actually, which we will get into. But yeah, I haven't used a label for Luann when I'm talking about it because the book doesn't make clear what her different needs are. There's a few different things that they say, and it's mentioned that she's at a different school than Amy. So I suppose that maybe she is special needs in some way. But I think the book didn't want to make it too explicit because maybe it's a bit more relatable. Hi, Grim. Grim has an opinion. By being, it's not really ambiguous, but by being a little bit broad, it's kind of includes a larger array of people in the sort of discussion of the book, or in the, in the sort of themes of the book and stuff like that. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, so Amy runs off. She has a cry and she goes for a walk to clear her head, and she finds herself on her way to her cool aunt's place. There's always in life that one cool aunt that gets it, just understands stuff, and I love that. They are worth their weight in gold in this life. And so I love that this book has one, because I think that's awesome. The sign said Rainbow Falls, 3 miles. Amy's run had long slowed to a walk. Now she hesitated, aware that darkness was closing in and she was leaving Claiborne behind her. Her eyes burned and her chest felt tight, but mostly she was just tired. Somewhere back there, she'd shed much of her anger in a storm of tears. Ahead, lights glimmered in far-apart houses. Misty patches of dark loomed between them. It's pitiful, she thought, being out here all alone in the cold with no one to care, while other people are snug and safe with their families. Well, actually, the June evening was pleasantly warm, not cold, and if her parents didn't know where she was and maybe didn't care, there was someone nearby who did. She knew that Aunt Claire, her father's sister, would be glad to see her. So it's pretty spooky out there near Aunt Claire's place, and we are having a mood set for us. This house is a little bit out of town. It tends to be a little bit dark around this house. Sometimes there's bats, gravel-lined roads. What else do we have? Patches of dark looming. I really like this mood that it's setting. So Aunt Claire is her father's sister, and there's a hint of coolness between Amy's mom and Aunt Claire. So that's kind of a little interesting, a little intriguing. We learn that Aunt Claire is staying in the house because the grandparents have left it. But we don't know, are they dead? Have they just left and gone somewhere? We don't know, but the house is awesome. It is all banisters and tower rooms and attics and things like that. So when we arrive, Aunt Claire is up in the attic doing a clean out, which sounds absolutely heavenly. There's so much cool stuff up there. And Amy follows her up and finds the doll's house. Look at this. It's the most perfect doll's house I've ever seen. She dropped to her knees as her aunt came to stand behind her. It's this house. Look, here's the stair tower and the front porch and the eagle door knocker, everything. It's just beautiful. Aunt Claire ran her finger along one side of the facade. The entire front of the house swung away, revealing rooms full of miniatures. Amy loved miniatures. Some of the bookshelves in her bedroom at home had been emptied to make room for tiny tables, lamps, chests of drawers, even a piano that she'd bought with her own money or that had been given to her. There's the grandfather clock. It has a ship painted on it, just like the real one in the hall downstairs, and the rugs are the same, and the painting above the fireplace. And look at the tiny candlesticks. There used to be a pair just like them on the dining room table downstairs, Aunt Claire said. Every detail is correct. Her voice was curiously flat. Imagine finding this thing. It must be worth a fortune, and it sounds amazingly detailed, like absolutely fabulous. So the doll's house was a gift to Aunt Claire, who was 15 at the time and into Elvis, which is really cute. So she was hoping for, quote, a phonograph. which I just love that. But yeah, so 15-year-old in the 50s loves Elvis. And so she wasn't very impressed with the doll's house as a gift. So here we get some backstory. So Claire was 14 and her younger brother, Amy's father, was 1 when their parents died of a kind of flu. That's kind of all they say. So they were sent to live with their grandparents, and the grandparents made the doll's house as a gift for Aunt Claire. But it was the 50s, so she wanted to, I don't know, do the jitterbug and drink malts at the local pharmacy or whatever. And her grandmother, who was almost an invalid, and I mean, thinking about it, she would have grown up probably around the turn of the century. So she wanted to dress her in little frills and give her girly stuff. And there was just that generation gap there. And it's sad. You can tell that Aunt Claire has some feelings about that now that she's grown up, but also the tragic backstory. And there's more tragedy to come. I shouldn't laugh about that, but it's just such a juicy plot that I'm excited. So for now, we learn a lot of the miniatures inside were handmade by her grandparents, which sounds remarkable. There's like needlepoint cushions and all kinds of stuff. I mean, a labor of love. And Amy is in love with this doll's house, and I would be too. And because Amy loves this kind of thing, we can see that she finds it comforting. So Aunt Claire sits her down for iced tea, and they have like a little heart-to-heart, and Aunt Claire talks about how she misses Chicago. And it was time to clear out her grandparents' house since she just lost her job and things like that. So it was a good time to do it. And it's cool. Aunt Claire doesn't talk down to Amy. So Amy's able to open up about what's happened to her and how she's feeling. And she feels that her mother is always blaming her, and then her father just stays out of it. And that like dynamic isn't great. So then Aunt Claire gives us a little more of the family story. So when she was 18 and Amy's dad was 5, their grandparents, who they were living with, were killed in what she says is an accident. So then the 2 kids were split up. Aunt Claire went to Chicago and found work, and Amy's dad was raised by a cousin from the age of 5. So she explains that the loss of his parents and then the loss of his grandparents and the older sister moving away made him just want peace and connection and family. Like, that's really important to him. And this is just such an emotionally mature thing to find in a book for this age group, like this understanding of, why the dad wants to be a peacekeeper in his family and that kind of thing. So when Amy expresses she can't wait to grow up and move away, Aunt Claire is like, maybe you can stay with me here for a little bit and have a little break. And I love this. I love that Aunt Claire is really subtly like, I'll ask your dad, kind of knowing that Amy's mom won't approve. So she's got to like get around her. I just find that funny. And yeah, I mean, we find out Amy's taking care of her sister every day after school and then doing her homework and stuff like that. So she doesn't have a life. And the kid needs a break. But how will her parents manage? So I like how we get a lot of family stories and gossip, and also the kind of collusion between Aunt Claire and Amy. It's just nice. It's a nice scene. It's cool. And yeah, we also see that Amy is a little bit worried about being homesick, which is cute. But then she thinks of the doll's house and she's like, I definitely want to be here for now. So her parents talk. Her mom is really against the idea. Not because it's term time, but because she thinks a 12-year-old girl can't need change in her life. Like, what kind of problems could a 12-year-old girl have? And she also thinks that Claire is interfering. And this is kind of harsh, in my opinion. But then her dad sorts things out, and Luann is sad and wants to go too. So there's quite a complex dynamic that's portrayed here, I think. Complex family dynamic. I feel sorry for Luann because she's so used to doing everything with Claire that it's like, of course she wants to go too, But yeah, I think the adults are really well written in this book compared to other books from this era or like that were aimed at the same audience. It's written in such a way that you can really relate to all of the characters here. But I think as a kid, you probably would feel the most for Amy, seeing how she's struggling and taking on a lot, and it's affecting her personal feelings and social life and her personal growth and stuff, things like that. So she's trying to grow up. She's trying to develop her own personality, that kind of thing. But anyway, let's move on. She keeps the doll's house secret from Luann for now because it's sort of just for her in her mind. But she gets a call that Ellen wants to hang out, but there's a kind of subtle, she can tell that she means only with her, not with Luann. And Amy doesn't love that attitude, but she's happy to hear from her friend. And so she asks her to come meet her at Aunt Claire's instead of, at the mall or whatever. She packs her stuff. She says goodbye to her mom. And her mom and this is a quote, "I'll call you later." Amy bent and kissed her mother's cheek. "Dad's taking me out to Aunt Claire's now." Mrs. Trelaw nodded. "I still don't understand," she said. "I don't see why you're so eager to get away from us. We had a disagreement yesterday, but..." Amy moved towards the door. "It's not that I want to get away from you." "Not exactly, anyway. We love you very much, I know. Luann loves you too." "I know." Amy was sure she'd scream if her mother said one more word. "I'll call tomorrow. Goodbye, Mom." So her mom doesn't get it, and her dad drives her, and at the house, Amy shows Ellen around. The place sounds amazing. And then she shows her the doll's house, which they love. I mean, it's pretty awesome. It has little tiny plates and chairs. I love it. So then while they're there, they find the dolls that go with the house. And there's one that looks like a teenage Aunt Claire, and then Aunt Claire's grandparents, which would be Amy's great-grandparents, and little boy era version of Amy's dad. So they take them out of the box and they put them in the house. And then Aunt Claire offers them fudge, which is cute. So to quote from the book, "I wish someone would make a doll that looked like me," she said, "and a house that looked like our house. I'd keep it forever right in my living room." "No, you wouldn't," Aunt Claire said. "If it made you unhappy, you'd try to forget it existed, which is frankly what I would like to do, please." Her smile didn't quite take the sting out of the words. "Now how about some cookies with that fudge?" So we learn Aunt Claire has some very sad feelings about the doll's house, and we sense that there's maybe a little bit of a story here. And then we get this. Amy quickly decides to pop up to the attic and close the doll's house doors. She flicked the switch that lit the overhanging bulb at the top. As she climbed, she found herself walking on tiptoe. The silence was different when she was alone. Beyond the circle of light, the furniture, boxes, and trunks loomed large. A sound, like the scurrying of a mouse, made Amy catch her breath. It came from the dollhouse corner. Ellen and Aunt Claire seemed far away. "Just close up the house and go downstairs, silly," she scolded herself. But she had to force herself to walk across the attic. The sound came again, a small, frightening scratch. So it's super spooky, it's atmospheric, and one of the dolls has moved on its own. I love that. It is really spooky. So Amy doesn't tell anyone because I guess it's a little bit weird. She doesn't tell anyone about the grandmother doll moving because that's the doll that moved. But as she sits on the porch with Ellen and Aunt Claire, just enjoying the day ending peacefully, there's a crash. Sneaking over, the three of them startle some raccoons that are getting into the trash. And it's fun. It's kind of a giggly moment. They kind of have their flashlight out and they approach the trash cans. And then Amy says that her mom would not have gone to investigate. And Aunt Claire is like, "Girls, you got to be independent and face things because there's not always going to be someone you can call." Got it. Learn to solve your own problems. I like this message. I think that's pretty cool. So Aunt Claire gently points out that Amy's mom isn't super independent and that Luann can learn to do more things for herself than her mom is really allowing her to do. And then Aunt Claire says, because Ellen and Amy's birthdays are close together, she's like, "Let's throw a joint birthday party with Ellen and have pizza." And I love this. Pizza at a party was really kind of cool back in the day. I mean, this is like the early 80s, but even in the 90s, it was like you had to have pizza at your party. And I mean, pizza is always good. I mean, sounds great. So things are going well for Amy. Most of the time, Amy enjoyed her vacation from sister sitting. No one begged her to play baby games. No one insisted on going along every time she went out. No one hung around listening, asking questions, interrupting when Ellen came over after school. No one turned the television on full blast and then wandered away or complained if Amy curled up with a book for hours. Planning the double birthday party was a special treat. So yeah, it's just like things are going well. The break seems to be helping Amy a little bit. So when Amy tells her mom about the birthday party, she is not cool with it. And she says passive aggressively, "I'll bake you a cake after Luann is asleep because you're making her very sad and you're a terrible child." Okay, she doesn't actually say that, but she implies something like it. And I kind of hate her mom for being like that. But yeah, let's let the kid have a birthday, it's fine. Yeah, Aunt Claire says that she likes having kids in the house, and when Amy asks, she looks sad, and she says she wanted kids, but she was too busy working and providing for herself and stuff like that, and it kind of didn't happen. Maybe if she'd met the right person kind of is her answer as well. So then Amy, whilst they're sharing, asks what accident happened that killed her grandparents, and something about Aunt Claire's face and her parents never talking about it. She kind of gets her Nancy Drew on. So looking for answers, she and Ellen go to the local library and we get a description of microfiche, and they look up the newspapers from 1952. Microfiche, I wonder if libraries still have microfiche. I think everything's probably digitally scanned. So you don't really see the microfiche anymore. It was kind of a way of archiving a lot of things, but newspapers were often on microfiche, and it's like almost like a film canister, and it would run through this thing and then it would be magnified on the screen in front of you, and you'd kind of scroll back and forth. It's very old school. So yeah, they're looking up newspapers from 1952. This is excellent detective work for a kid in this era. I love it. And then they see it. Prominent couple murdered in their home. 5-year-old grandson found hidden and asleep in closet. So that 5-year-old is Amy's dad. So are you ready for the description of a murder as found in this book for children? Okay, so 18-year-old Claire went to the movies with friends, and when she came home, she found her grandmother's body. So she goes and calls for help, and the police find her grandfather shot dead in the bedroom. And at first it looks like the child was kidnapped, so that's their first theory, but he seems to have hidden from an intruder in a wooden chest and fallen asleep. But it also happens that Claire's boyfriend Thomas was in a car accident that same night and died. Damn, like that is dark. That is some Forensic Files episode details there. Like if I had started that with like, it was a small sleepy town, I mean, it would be just like a Forensic Files episode. Yeah, but Amy's on their microfiche. She looks a little further for more, news headlines and what she can find out, but she doesn't find details to find out if the case was solved. But she does understand why Aunt Claire does not really like the house or the doll's house much. And why she sort of, Amy's like, oh my gosh, I've been asking her these, personal questions that are just bringing up this horrible thing she went through. So yeah, when she gets back to Aunt Claire's, Luann has called and asked to talk to her. And it's nice. She just wants to tell Amy about her day and that she's... So somebody else in the neighborhood has Mrs. Peck, I think they call her. She is taking Luann after school, and they're doing after school learning and making fun things, and it sounds really fun. And then later on after that, she's talking to Ellen on the phone, and Ellen asks if she thinks the house is haunted, which is quite fun. Amy says no and talks a little bit about looking up more to find out if the killer was ever found. And dramatically, Aunt Claire walks in right then and hears her words. So I feel so bad for Amy, like so uncomfortable and just horrible. So Aunt Claire is upset because she thinks that Amy was gossiping about her. And there's a bit of an implication that she sort of would jump to that conclusion because she's been gossiped about before because of what happened to the house. So Amy tries to explain, and Aunt Claire is like, the killer was never found. So there's your answer. And also I need to be alone, which is kind of fair. But then Aunt Claire heads up to the attic with a box. She's like going to store something up there. And then this happens. The hall was dark, the house very still except for Aunt Claire's steps overhead. With dragging feet, Amy made her way down the hall, past the bedroom where her great-grandfather had been killed. She had just reached her own room and had her hand on the light switch when a strangled cry broke the silence. "Aunt Claire?" Amy raced back down the hall. "Aunt Claire, are you okay?" There was no answer. Amy ran up the attic steps. Her aunt was standing in the far corner of the attic, staring in horror at the doll's house. "How could you do it?" she cried. "How could you do such a cruel, ugly thing?" "Do what?" Amy hurried to her aunt's side. The dollhouse was open, and the small box that had held the dolls was open too. The girl doll was back in the box. The grandfather doll lay face down across the bed in the master bedroom, and the grandmother stood where Amy had last seen her in the parlor. Aunt Claire bent, robotic-like, and reached into the parlor, carefully avoiding the doll that balanced against the bookcase. With a fingernail, she loosened a tiny latch in the wall and opened the wood closet door next to the fireplace. The boy doll lay inside with its head pillowed on a log the length of a pin. She stood up. "This is unforgivable, Amy," she said, with a voice of ice. "I suppose you have a right to know our miserable family history. I can try and make myself understand your need to find out, but to make a game of the deaths of your great-grandparents? How could you?" So Aunt Claire is pretty upset. Amy had put the dolls back in the box and closed up the doll's house. And when Aunt Claire went up there, the dolls had moved and they're in the places where they were when the murders happened. So Aunt Claire is understandably upset and thinks Amy set the dolls up like that deliberately as some kind of a prank. And Amy is upset that Aunt Claire would think that. And she denies that she did it. She makes the point that she couldn't have set the dolls up like that since she didn't know about the murder and the circumstances till that day. So the way that kind of works out in the story context is that when the dolls were moved, she wouldn't have known to put them in that position. So we know she didn't do it, and that's pretty spooky. So Amy goes to her room. She's feeling freaked out by the thing with the dolls. She just found out her great-grandparents were murdered. Big reveal there. And Aunt Claire thinks she's a terrible person. So she's starting to feel homesick. She thinks that maybe she should just leave, but then she thinks that there's some reason why the dolls moved or were moved, and she decides that someone is trying to tell her something, and leaving means no one will ever find out what. So, I mean, I like her determination. She has trouble sleeping that night, and then she wakes up to her doorknob being slowly turned, and then there's a loud crash, and it turns out it's just Aunt Claire coming in to check on her, and the raccoons are in the trash again. But bless her, she's so frightened, she runs into the bathroom and throws up. Oh, bless her. So Aunt Claire is sorry for scaring her and apologizes for their fight before. We get the idea that Aunt Claire still doesn't believe she didn't stage the dolls, but she decides to talk. So at the time, teenage Claire was dating a guy, but he was a bit older and he drank heavily. And when they get engaged, her grandparents forbid her from seeing him because he comes over one time and he's just completely hammered. This is in a kid's book, by the way. So Claire kept seeing him behind their back, and it created a lot of tension. And right before the grandparents were killed, she had told them in anger that she hated them, and she has to live with that. And that is horrible. So Aunt Claire leaves to get some sleep, and Amy is like, there's something more that she didn't tell me. And then you can hear owls hooting and the wind whistling around the house during this scene. So Amy goes home after school the next day, and it's cute. She sees her home with fresh eyes, which I think is really nice. I feel like that's kind of almost a little bit of a coming of age, because I think we just accept our childhood home, and then there's a point where you kind of start to see it, if that makes sense. And she also, when she looks at her house, she sees how much happiness and love is there. So she has a little bit more perspective. They're actually a loving family. Luann and her mom come home and they have an interesting conversation. Luann is having a lot of fun with Mrs. Peck. She's gaining some new skills and she has a new friend and she's learning a little bit of independence. And I just think it's nice. So Luann's doing well. Interestingly, both Amy and her mom have some feelings about this. They're a little bit triggered by it, and they sort of want to deny Luann's growth or be like, oh, you know, she can't be independent. And then Amy's party comes up. I'd better go. I told Aunt Claire I'd be back early because you have some stuff to do tonight to get ready for the party. Darn, the word had slipped out before she could stop it. Amy groaned out loud. This was certainly her day for saying the wrong thing. Party? The poppet dangled forgotten from Luann's hand. What party? I want to go too, Mom. Mrs. Trelaw shook her head. Amy's having a few friends over at Aunt Claire's tomorrow night. Nothing special. We'll have her real birthday party right here when she comes home. We'll have a cake and we'll play games and you can invite Marissa. But Luann was not to be sidetracked. I want to go to the party at Aunt Claire's house, she cried. I want to go to that party. Well, you can't. The words were sharper than Amy had intended. She was disgusted with herself, and she was angry at her mother, too. Why does she always make me feel like a selfish monster? Why can't she just once say, this is Amy's birthday party, and she and her friends have a right to be alone? That would never happen. And I mean, why can't her mom stand up for her? Like, in the book where she says, like, her real party, it's like in italics, like it's really emphasized. I mean, I think it's really mean. Like, oh, your real party will be here. And even though it's Amy's party, she won't be able to have any friends there. And then her sister will be there and her sister's friend. So then she basically says, I hope you know you're a terrible person for not having your sister at your birthday. Okay, she doesn't literally say that. So now Amy wants her own space and her own birthday party without her sister. And I mean, maybe you think that she should just have her sister there. Personally, my sort of take on this while reading it was it felt like a healthy level of differentiation for the character's age range. Like, Amy, it's not that she doesn't love her sister. It's not that her sister can't come to other parties. It's just more that Amy wants something that is her own, that it's not going to be taken over by, you know, caring for Luann or Luann's sort of needs and personality coming first. So to me, it felt like healthy that she wanted just something of her own. But I mean, maybe, I mean, I know families deal with birthdays in different ways, so I'm not judging that too harshly. But what I really object to is her mom using guilt and shame to make her feel bad for not wanting her sister to be there, because it's easier for her mom if she has her sister there. So I get it. Like, I feel like her mom doesn't want to deal with how Luann's feelings make her feel bad as a mother, as opposed to really thinking about sort of what's best for the two girls. And I don't know, that's kind of, I just think it's interesting. Back at Aunt Claire's, she's adorably excited about hosting Amy's party, and I just love it. It's really cute. And then we get some more family gossip. Aunt Claire thinks that Luann should have friends outside of Amy and support from people outside of the home, and she should have a bit of her own life and her own future. And apparently she made the mistake of saying so at dinner one time and pissing off Amy's mom. So Aunt Claire is a little bit older than Paul, which is Amy's dad, if you remember there's an age gap there. And I can kind of see her doing the older sister, older person thing and just saying what she thinks really blandly, because she's like a bunch older, but also just older siblings often tell you what you should do with your life. Yeah, so that's why they don't get along. And then Aunt Claire is like, oh, you just go up to the attic, because when Ellen sleeps over here, she's going to need a blanket, and they're all up in that blanket box in the attic. And Amy tries to get out of it because she's scared to go into the attic. She's freaked out about the dolls moving by themselves. Amy, I forgot to tell you, I think the light is burned out in the attic. Take the big flashlight that's on the table next to my bed. Oh, great. Amy's heart thudded as she switched on a lamp in Aunt Claire's room and searched for the flashlight. She was halfway up the stairs, the flashlight beam bobbing on the steps in front of her, when she heard a small sound. Mice. Please let it be mice. A funny thing to wish, considering how much she hated mice. She stood still. The sound stopped too, just for a moment, then began again. Something was moving around in the darkness above her. The trunk on the left at the top of the stairs. Amy said the words to herself, trying to close out every other thought. When she reached the top step, she saw the big metal chest, right where Aunt Claire had said it would be. She leaned over to loosen the fastenings with trembling fingers. The top blanket, she told herself. Quick. The rustling, scraping sound grew louder. It was coming from the dollhouse corner. Without really meaning to, Amy swung the flashlight beam across the attic. The sheet that had covered the house was on the floor in a white heap. The house gaped open. Amy's knees turned to jelly. The flashlight slipped from her fingers. When she tried to bend down and pick it up, she couldn't move. All she could do was stare at the house and at the eerie glow that was beginning to fill the dollhouse parlor. So spooky. Yeah, so the blanket box, I guess this is kind of a side thing, but that blanket box sounds like a military footlocker, you know, the vintage metal ones. I love those. Yeah, I mean, cool things that you find in attics in 80s kids books. I'm sure there's a mystery diary up there and some vintage clothes. Sounds like heaven. But yeah, scary stuff, right? So basically, she goes to her room. She puts a chair in front of the door so she can sleep. And we find out that she saw the light go on in the doll's house and she saw one of the dolls walking around. So she left the attic without the blanket, which means the next day, the day of the party, Aunt Claire offers to go up. Well, Amy doesn't want Aunt Claire to see if things are up with the doll's house after their last conversation. So she's really scared, but she goes up herself. She gets a spare blanket and she sees the dolls have moved. So once again, they're in the places they were during the murder. She closes the doll's house and gets out of there. She bails. Downstairs, her mom and Luann are on the phone. So she can tell her mom is not happy with her. Her aunt says that her mom would want her to enjoy her first teenage party because she's turning 13. And she's aware that that's not what her mom wants. She wants her to feel bad about Luann. So on the way to school, she sees two younger girls giggling. And this little 13-year-old Amy is like, I remember when I used to feel young and carefree like that without these adult burdens. And I'm like, she's not wrong. There's a lot happening in this book. And I just feel really bad for her. She's dealing with a murder in her family. There's her aunt's trauma, her mom and sister making her feel bad. Just let the kid have a normal birthday. And it sounds so cute. They're going to make pizza, like homemade pizza, and they have a fortune-telling game, and going to play with makeup and have snacks. It's really cute. It sounds like a great evening, actually. But then Amy's mom has an emergency and drops Luann over at Aunt Claire's. So Amy is fuming. She thinks her mom could have taken Luann with her, and she feels like she's done this deliberately, which would kind of track, honestly. Poor Luann and Aunt Claire are like just in the middle of this. Luann is 100% like, I am here because I wanted to come to your party. I mean, was it really an emergency? Okay, probably, in fairness. But anyway, Aunt Claire has a little talk to Luann just about allowing Amy to be the center of attention at her own party. And it's not as bad as Amy thought, which is nice. Luann is described as wearing a pantsuit to the party, which is funny, like a little 11-year-old politician pantsuit. Anyway, Luann makes a friend, which is nice. Amy's having a good time. The girls all have their pizza. They do each other's makeup. They read each other's, I think it's meant to be like tarot cards or something. And then Ellen mentions the dollhouse. And though Aunt Claire isn't happy about it, they head up the attic to look at it. And they're all delighted with it, which is like, why wouldn't you be? And it's cute. Luann is very gentle with the little pieces. It's just really nice. She's kind of in awe of the whole thing. But the dolls have moved themselves back again to the positions that they died in. So that keeps happening. Later that night, everyone goes home and Luann, Amy, and Ellen are left with Aunt Claire. And then, because Ellen's sleeping over. And then later, Amy wakes up and realizes that Luann is not there next to her. So, you ready for a spooky scene? She tiptoed down the hall and slipped through the attic doorway. Moonlight made a silvery tunnel of the stairwell. If she was lucky, she'd be able to bring Luann back downstairs without switching on the light. If I'm lucky, she repeated to herself. And if Luann doesn't see something that sends her into hysterics. If I don't have hysterics myself. Halfway up the stairs, Amy began to feel as if she were reliving her nightmare visit to the attic 24 hours ago. There were the same noises, small, scratchy sounds, a little like a mouse might make, but not a mouse. Before she reached the top step, she saw that the house was open. The parlor was glowing eerily. In front of the house, Luann knelt, staring with rapt attention into the lighted room. Amy fought down the urge to run. She couldn't go without Luann. On tiptoe, she crossed the attic to her sister's side. Luann looked up. "Look at the dolly," she said in a voice that was much softer than usual. Amy looked without wanting to. The grandmother doll still stood in front of the bookcase, but now one blue-clad arm was raised. As Amy stared, a tiny book fell from the shelf, and then another, and another. They simply slid off the shelves and lay scattered at the doll's feet. "The poor dolly is crying," Luann murmured. So Luann can hear the doll crying, and the little tiny books fall off the shelf, and it's a clue. The next day, Amy and Ellen have planned a hike, and Luann is invited. The party went well. Amy feels a little bit defensive when Aunt Claire says that her watching her sister might be a burden. So it's interesting. That's how Amy did feel previously, but maybe it's one thing for her to call it that. Maybe she doesn't like somebody else calling her that or pointing it out. But she's thinking there's some personal growth happening here. It's cool. So Luann spills the beans during the hike, and Amy tells Ellen the secret about the doll's house. "A ghostly secret?" Ellen's eyes shone. "Amy, that's the most exciting, most scary thing I've ever heard. I don't see how you could keep quiet about it. What are you going to do?" "I don't know. This morning I thought about telling my dad, but he'd want to see for himself, and then Aunt Claire would know. She'd probably order us all out of the house." "Maybe we should go back to the library and read some more about the murders." Amy shrugged. "I have a feeling we wouldn't find much. Maybe we can..." She was suddenly tired of thinking about a problem that seemed to have no answer. "Maybe we can just wait and see what happens." I mean, Ellen is right. It's totally awesome. Ellen points out in this scene that her minister believes in ghosts, and she thinks Luann and Amy are brave, which is cool. They have a nice day together, a little hike and a picnic and some bonding. It's really cute. But when they get back, Aunt Claire is waiting. As soon as Ellen's mom picks her up, she turns on Amy. She went up to the attic. She saw the dolls had moved again, but she thinks Amy did it. And we get a further detail. Aunt Claire was upset because, like the night of the crime, a desk had been moved in front of a door, presumably to block the killer's entrance, which, I mean, that's terrifying. So Amy and Luann level with Aunt Claire, and they tell her the doll's house is haunted. Aunt Claire is more upset, and she says, "I'd like to believe you wouldn't lie to me," she said tiredly. "But if you're telling the truth, if there's a restless, unhappy spirit haunting this place, that's even worse, because it means that what I've always suspected is true, and I can't bear that." Amy really takes on a lot of responsibility for people's feelings and things like that in this book. She decides at this point she's done all she can. I mean, Aunt Claire isn't her responsibility now, but when you think about it, Aunt Claire should never have been her responsibility because she's the child. Anyway, there's a storm coming, and the two sisters are not feeling comfortable. They decide to try and call home in case Mom is back. Amy kind of thinks that maybe her mom might be back home if it was all just a ploy to force Amy to have Luann at her party, but her mom isn't home, so I guess her mom didn't lie, which is cool. And Aunt Claire is like, "Okay, let's talk. Here's the thing. Her alcoholic boyfriend was 10 years older than her, which is not a great look, but beside the point. And she says that she thinks that he was the killer, and that's what she's lived with all this time. So it turns out he had a really scary temper and was pretty pushy and was sort of pressuring her to get married to him. And she was kind of lying to herself about that and being not okay behavior. And at one point he says he's going to confront her grandparents about their interfering in the relationship. And so that's why Aunt Claire thinks that he probably came to the house, confronted them, and it ended in murder. And so she feels like it was all her fault because she brought that into their lives. I just feel so bad for her. Like, she was only 18, and the book describes it as blood everywhere when she walked into the room. So that's not great for anyone to see that. And that's in a kid's book, just quietly, just to remind you, this is for kids. So yeah, basically she says she ran when she saw what happened and found out later that it looked like her grandparents were surprised by an intruder while they slept. Grandfather was shot, and the grandmother ran, grabbed the little boy, hit him, and tried to barricade herself in the parlor. The phone lines had been cut, so she couldn't phone for help. So she was killed, and the place looked ransacked. And as she's telling this sort of retelling of what she saw, lightning is cracking, and she suspects that it was staged by her boyfriend to look like a burglary. So Aunt Claire bailed on the town, never looking back. As soon as I could get away, as soon as I knew Paul would be taken care of, I went to Chicago to look for a job. I never wanted to see Claiborne or be reminded of what happened here again. But you did come back, Amy marveled. I don't think I could have done it. I didn't have much choice, Aunt Claire replied. You see, even though I'd left Claiborne behind, I couldn't forget. The guilt, the terrible feeling that Grandma and Grandpa died because of me just about drove me out of my mind. Eventually I found a good job, but 6 months later I was fired. I had awful headaches that made me miss work and moody times when I just couldn't get control of myself. I found another job and the same thing happened. It's never really stopped. The periods between explosions are longer now, but the bad times haven't ended. I dream again and again about this house and what happened here. A couple of months ago, after a long period of sleeplessness, I had a battle with my boss, and I was out of a job again. Just about then, your father wrote, pleading with me to take time to look over the house and get it ready to be sold. I had nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. I thought maybe if I came back and emptied the old place of all its memories, I'd be able to make a fresh start. So here I am, she said dryly, scaring my 2 nieces to death with all the gruesome details I wanted to forget. And with a haunted doll's house, so you tell me, up in the attic. That's the thought I can't tolerate, the idea that my grandparents can't rest peacefully any more than I can. She smiled wearily at Amy. So, descriptions of a trauma response or PTSD, in a book for kids, for 8-year-olds. Actually, this is probably better than kids seeing people just walk things off, like in most action movies and stuff like that. This is a bit more like, these things have a long-term impact on you, and it's quite an accurate description of that. So, I don't know. But anyway, this just makes Amy more determined to find out what's up with the doll's house because she wants to help her aunt heal. Her mom calls, and we learn she really did have an emergency, and she also apologizes for how it went down. And nice one, Mom. See, her mom's not so bad. That night, the raging storm wakes them, and Amy and Luann go downstairs to see what the doll's house might want to tell them. As the lightning crashes, they watch. They see the dolls actually move this time, and it's pretty eerie and creepy. And they hear the grandmother sobbing and the footsteps coming for her down the stairs of the doll's house. They're basically hearing the murder play out. Like, that's really dark. They run away and wake Aunt Claire. They hear the woman cowering and crying as her killer comes for her and breaks down the parlor door. So Aunt Claire, like the genius she is, knows that Coco is the answer. They go down to the kitchen and she's like, tell me what's up. I'm making us hot chocolate. And then the power goes out. So she gets the little gas lamp out, and they tell her, the whole story. And she's like, okay, I believe you, but that means my grandmother is haunting me because she hates me, and it was definitely my evil fiance who did the deed. Amy is like, okay, maybe yeah. But then she remembers that the grandmother always does something with the books on the shelf in the doll's house. So she says they should check that out. That's probably the message of the doll's house. So they head into the parlor and they pull the books down, but they don't find anything until Luann drops one of the books and a letter slides out. So conveniently, Aunt Claire's grandmother spent her last moments writing down who the killer was and what his motive is. It was Reuben, their handyman. He was after money. Something magic was happening, a small miracle in the circle of yellow lamplight. Tight little lines in Aunt Claire's face melted away, and her pale cheeks flushed with color. She looked younger, gentler, prettier than Amy had ever seen her before. "When you said there was a ghost, I was angry with you, Amy," she murmured. "I thought if that's true, the ghost is Grandma Trelawney, and she's still furious after all these years because her killer was never identified. I thought she wants me to go on feeling guilty forever. But now I know Tom didn't kill them, and Grandma Trelawney wanted me to know the truth. If her spirit has come back, it's because she wants me to stop driving myself crazy over something that wasn't my fault at all." She was like a little girl, thrilled and relieved, asking Amy and Luann to be happy with her. Don't you think that's why she came back? Also, the book that the grandmother hid the letter in was Ibsen's The Doll's House. So, I mean, that's a bit on the nose. So the storm has passed, washed things clean. Aunt Claire is finally at peace. We know the resolution to the mystery. Amy is ready to go home. But then Aunt Claire says something interesting. Amy says that only the family can take care of Luann because she's their burden. And Aunt Claire is like, she needs her own life. And your mom feels guilty that your sister is disabled. So there's some family shame there that you're all perpetuating. But things happen. Luann is cool. She's not a burden. And I think this is very insightful. I don't know if people really sort of think this way now or whatever, but women could, and sometimes probably still can be, made to feel ashamed if their child isn't born like physically perfect, or, you know, however you want to see that, so to speak. Okay. So there's a lot of shame in the past for this kind of thing. And if your child was born in any way, you know, with a disability or anything, it was very much considered the mother's shame, or even like if you go back quite far in history, it would be like a, you know, a curse from God kind of thing. So there's a lot of shame was put on women around this stuff. And the book's kind of hinting at that, that, you know, her mother feels like Luann is like a private burden that the family, only the family should deal with it, sort of thing, like trying to keep it in the family. And yeah, but what is cool is that the book makes Luann a whole character, and she's a cool person. So there's some deep stuff in this book. When they go up to see the doll's house, all is well there, and Aunt Claire gives Luann the doll's house, which is really cute. She's very excited. And then Amy looks at her dad and realizes that he has his own dark memories or feelings about that time. And he's like, look at the family in the doll's house, and just, they're chilling together. So family is everything. I just think that's really cute. Her father seems to really enjoy belonging to his family and just really appreciate them, and it's nice. The end. So I didn't make a lot of fun of this book like some of the other books in this series. I think this hasn't dated too badly. It's just such a good book. It's got murder and ghosts and secrets and this cool house in the middle of nowhere, and there's the doll's house and storms. And there's the extra layer of taking these complex feelings about Luann's role in the family and the two girls needing to grow, which I think is cool. It's like I think anyone can relate to that. But I also think it sort of adds an element of getting younger readers to sort of think about it critically and maybe be a little kinder to each other or whatever. Yeah, it's pretty dark. But there's also this really nice relationship between the two sisters, and in the end it's together that they solve the mystery, which is cool. So while Amy is annoyed by having too much of Luann, there's a really genuine love there between them, and we get to see it blossom at the end when they solve the doll's house murder together. And I think they can have a better relationship because there's a little bit more space in it now, and it's more healthy and balanced. And while the dad is a bit absent maybe, and the mom is kind of overbearing, there's actually a man who loves the belonging he's found in the family he's made as an adult, and a mom who feels guilty for her daughter's disability. So in the end, they're actually like well-rounded, interesting people. Yeah, I think the way the disability is talked about in this book, there aren't too many words that are super offensive. Like I don't think you'd be offended reading it now, but I do think we talk about things in a better way now. But it's not disrespectful, and I think the book is really emotionally intelligent about Luann and her disability and the way her family has sort of responded to it. Luann isn't just a token character, she's a neat kid in her own right, and Amy's feelings about it are understandable, but in the end, the fact that Luann is a person and not a burden is like the really important thing of that storyline. And yeah, and it's cool we see other kids being nice to Luann, and like there's a thoughtful message for child readers at a time when a lot of places, I don't think they really had wheelchair access, for example, and stuff like that. And kids like Luann could sometimes be a little bit seen and not heard kind of thing. So I think that's a nice thing that the book addresses in a very loving way. And it's cool. But mostly I love the beautiful doll's house and how it's described, and the ghost story. It's such a great little book. And I said it so many times during like talking to you about it, but all of that stuff is dark for kids. Like it's crazy. Or maybe it's not crazy. But it to me, it's like that plot line could be lifted from a Forensic Files episode, and it was aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds. This book, so yeah. If you read this book, or if you've read any of Betty Ren Wright's books, especially if you read them as a kid, please let me know, because I would love to know how reading this affected you, what stayed with you after reading it. Because different things are obviously staying with me as an adult reader. And I think if I read this when I was younger, I would have been pretty terrified. So I'm wondering what effect it had on people. If you read it as an adult and it had an impact on you, I'd love to hear that too. And yeah, thank you for joining me once again and hanging out with me, talking about this book. You can check out some of my other videos. I also have another channel and socials, so you can find links below if you want more of that. And if you want to hang out again, remember to like and subscribe. And you can always leave a comment, let me know what you thought, or let me know what else you might want to see. Thank you.